I want to start this video by saying that I am a fan of Avowed, and I had a lot of fun with it. As I reflect on my time, I'm pleased with the experience that it offered. I start with this caveat because when taking a more critical look at each component of its design, its issues become more noticeable. By the end, they all spearhead into my overall opinion that Avowed is a fun content dispenser, but not an exhilarating or fulfilling story-driven adventure. Reporting on those problems is what I intend to do, but to be clear, they don't sour the experience fully. Instead, they create a range of tedium that some players will be okay with, while others may end up feeling burnt out before the credits roll. You see, gear progression, and therefore your success in combat and your ability to progress the main story, is heavily tied to completing side content. It's not unfounded to expect players to engage with the optional missions in an open world game, but it feels downright necessary to do so here, which can propel that creeping tedium. That's because, despite a small handful of interesting twists and turns, the world building, the overall plot, and the characters you meet are never able to rise out of mediocrity. I rarely found myself invested in the narrative. Instead, I was more compelled by the elements that Avowed borrows from its biggest source of inspiration, Skyrim. Exploration and combat are motivated by what's come before, and it's a loop that continues to work mechanically, especially with the introduction of that gear progression. Explore the world, fight the enemies, collect the loot, upgrade your gear, and move on and do it again. If you've been itching for something like Skyrim with only this image swirling in your head over the last 7 years, then you may find some satisfaction here. Besides that industry titan, Avowed takes inspiration from other titles as well, such as a camping system that seems eerily similar to Baldur's Gate 3, or even from previous Obsidian titles like The Outer Worlds. All in all, Avowed was a good time over the nearly 40 hours it took me to complete the main story and most of the optional content. Exploration and combat really carry the experience most of the time, while the story kind of stumbles along. Unfortunately, that initial joy, spurred from the gameplay, does devolve into some tedium after starting from scratch in each of the game's 4 zones. The gameplay got a little bit repetitive as I played, but at least the story managed to drag itself out from the basement to achieve averageness by the end. You know, it did feel like some of my choices mattered, even if they felt more forced than natural. And I think that sums up my introductory thoughts. If you're looking for a simple should I play this or not, my answer is yes, give it a go, especially on Game Pass, but even a full purchase isn't out of the question. With that, let's jump in to my full review. I recall during this game's marketing cycle that Obsidian announced that Avowed would take place in the Pillars of Eternity universe, but I didn't actively remember this until I started playing. While it's not necessary to play those games to enjoy this one, it certainly felt like much of this world's lore and current state of affairs was glossed over throughout my time with it. Coming off a game like Metaphor ReFantazio, which brilliantly expands on its world, its history, and its cultures in natural ways, it felt jarring to play through Avowed without really understanding it beyond the fantasy tropes. You play as an envoy from the nation of Adir, and you're sent to the Living Lands to investigate the Dream Scourge, a natural plague that is turning people into zombie-like creatures. You've come to the Living Lands at the behest of your emperor, but after a ship crash, you're left virtually alone in these foreign lands that are in part guided by chaos. But you will find allies along the way. You're initially assured that the Steel Garrote, a violent militia of sorts, will have your back as long as your interests remain aligned with theirs. At the same time, you're a godlike, a being touched by the gods before birth, resulting in strange markings on your face. Essentially, you act as a representative for the god that marked you, but at the journey's start, you don't know who your god is. They haven't revealed themselves to you yet, but fret not, that's all part of the main story. All of this backstory is thrown at you very quickly in an opening cutscene, which is fine. It helps establish some basics, but it isn't built on effectively enough to convey everything to the player until about halfway through the game. I found myself fumbling through the opening hours, not really knowing exactly what was going on. That's because in-universe terminology that you aren't familiar with is used, and that's fine, but it's not always given enough context to grasp fully or in a natural way. You'll have NPCs commenting on your godlike nature, but you aren't ever really given a full picture of what that relationship should mean, which resulted in my appearance feeling more like a birthmark than an act of divine will. At the same time, companions of different origins are introduced using in-universe words to describe their race, their homelands, as well as words unique to their language without a ton of context to fully understand what they're referring to. For example, I thought this blue-looking snake companion named Kai was a Ratawan. I don't even know if I'm saying that right, but you know what? I'm right, he is Ratawan. But this refers to his country of origin, not his race, which had me thoroughly confused for quite some time. Eventually, I realized he was an Almawa, or however you say it. Again, I'm not 100% sure, but this word was used so little that I ended up thinking of him and those like him as snake people, given the scales. That's what I called him in my head. Then there's Marius, another companion who I thought of as a dwarf. I mean, he looks like a dwarf, but he's not just a dwarf, he's Pargrunin. It took me forever to figure out what that meant, since his people aren't really expanded on until late in the game. And Yatsli, man, I don't think I ever learned what sort of humanoid she was. I had to look it up, and it looks like the term is Orlin. I'm sure they told me once or twice, but when it's jumbled into the word salad of universe-specific terms, I just felt lost a lot of the time. It makes me wonder if the developers assumed that you have played Pillars of Eternity, but I can't imagine that to be the case given it's a completely different genre of game. That would be an outlandish expectation to have of every player, and so I doubt it's true. As a result, I'm left thinking that the writing just wasn't sharp enough to convey all of these terms in easy-to-digest ways, which left me scrambling at times to realize what a character was referring to. I got it down eventually. Perhaps a second run would afford me more understanding now that I've had more time to really get to know the terminology, but on a first run, I was confused a lot of the time. You'll put the pieces together eventually, but by then you're halfway through the game, and that was a little disappointing. At the same time, it doesn't help that the game's setup is weak. After the opening cutscene and making your character in a relatively competent and detailed creator, you're shown another slideshow. You'll learn about the Dream Scourge, the plague you've been sent to investigate at the behest of your emperor. But on your way, your ship hits a bad storm, and almost everyone perishes, leaving you washed up on shore. After going through the tutorial, you arrive in the Living Lands proper and begin your quest to stop the Dream Scourge. But really, that's about it. All you've been given is the information provided in the cutscenes, as well as a few snippets from this dude. It's strange to me because your character has been given a purpose, and partially a backstory, but it's devoid of any direct interactions with those elements that may expand on your mission. It's like the developers want you to have the freedom to decide your character's history and personality, but no matter what, you are an Adirian envoy, sent by the Emperor to investigate the disease. However, you're not going to have any time to interact with that part of your character's past. You won't ever meet the Emperor, exchange dialogue with him, see your homeland, or talk to your own people, and as a result, it feels like you're fighting for a vision that you haven't bought into. This naturally leads you to identify more with the people of the living lands, despite them not wanting to be taken over by the Adirian Empire, which creates conflict, but it's not ideal conflict. It's one-sided as you begin to become more sympathetic to the island's inhabitants, because you don't really know anything about where you came from other than the few things that you've been told. And to be quite frank, I don't care for that. Sure, you can remain faithful to Adir in dialogue choices and major decisions, but without knowing my character's homeland, those choices felt hollow despite me actually wanting to pursue them. I felt I was being morally shoehorned into supporting the people of the living lands, which I think is already a problem for an open-ended RPG, but it's actually made worse because I didn't care about the companions, the NPCs, or the cities I visited. They never got me to invest, and so I didn't want to support them. Part of that frustration is from going in blind, not being told much about the world or the lands I hailed from, but the other half of it is from the lackluster world and cultural design. I've already touched on why the cultures didn't work for me, a genuine lack of effort to inform me on the cultural differences between the gods, the humans, the Orlans, the Pargrunin, and the Almawau, I'm never gonna get that right. In fact, only the Pargrunin are ever really given a deep dive into their cultural norms. They're a tight-knit group of dwarves, bathed or stagnant in tradition, depending on how you look at it. Learning about their civilization at Solace Keep and deciding the fate of their home was one of the most interesting blends of choice and world building, but it's reserved for the final mission of the final major zone. In the 35 hours before this, I hardly felt that I had a good grasp on the people of this world, their cultural norms, their religious beliefs, or how they even live their day-to-day lives. And a big reason for that is the general lifelessness of this world, especially in the cities. You won't find people doing much other than standing around or occasionally walking, leaving them to feel like animatronics rather than living, breathing people. Their lack of reactivity to my actions as a player also didn't help, as they don't react to attacks or comment on what you're doing. Heck, you can't even steal from them. I love learning about the cultures that game developers come up with. It's part of why I view games like Horizon Forbidden West, Dark Souls, Witcher 3, and Metaphor ReFantazio in such high regards, but unfortunately, Avowed just is not up to par. And it certainly doesn't help that it was released around the same time as Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, a game that takes its world building and historical accuracy extremely seriously and being praised heavily for it. This cannot stack up. I will say though that the physical geography of the Living Lands does fare better than the cultural design when it comes to quality. It's nothing special. You have your run-of-the-mill biomes like coastlands, forest, desert, and mountainous volcanoes. You won't be blown away by originality, but they are presented with beauty throughout, whether it's an overlooking vista or just as you meander through them at ground level. Exploration is one of the two great strengths of Avowed, and the openness of these zones is a big reason for that, and I'll touch on that soon. For now, I just wanted to establish that this isn't one big open world. No, much like the Outer Worlds, it's a series of maps that you travel between. And to be honest, I do think this hurts the game overall. Look, I'm a sucker for large open worlds. They provide a continuity that I simply enjoy, even if they do have large stretches of nothing. There's still a joy in just roaming around them. You don't get that in Avowed. You get smaller maps that are easier to conquer, but completing one and pushing onto the next means starting from scratch again. It felt like all of my progress was wiped, and I understand not everyone is going to agree with that or feel the same way, but that's how it is for me. It generates tedium after the second map. Reaching the deserts of Shatterscarp didn't feel like an opportunity to explore a new world. It just kind of felt like all the work I did in Emerald Stair now meant nothing, and I think that's a shame. The maps themselves are fun to explore. They each have a major hub city, plenty of optional dungeons and villages, and lots of markers that grab your attention and encourage you to check them out from curiosity alone. It's just those damn transitions that took away from the experience for me. I like making progress, and starting fresh with each new map was a downside for me, but it may be a plus for others. But all in all, the world building really lacks a hook, something to pull you in from the opening moments, and without it, you're left floundering for quite some time as you fumble your way through the lifeless cities and unfamiliar lexicon. Perhaps it's different if you've played Pillars of Eternity, I can't say for sure. I do reckon that a second playthrough would lead to more clarity, given the snippets of world building that you eventually pick up on. Taking time to read all the books you find wouldn't hurt either. It's just a shame that much of the lore and interesting cultural notes are resigned to the pages of a book instead of being jam-packed into quests and exploration. Speaking of exploration though, and I think that's where this game succeeds most. While I didn't love the feeling of lost progress in moving from one map to another, there's an undeniable charm that exists from being set free in a world full of attention grabbers. It's a big reason why Bethesda games have done so well, especially Skyrim. If you see something interesting, go there and check it out. Quests and NPCs be damned. That same feeling exists in Avowed too, albeit on a smaller scale, given the minimized approach to world design. The reason for that success is that exploration rewards your soul and your progression. There's something so satisfying about charting a path into the unknown, not knowing what you will come across with just the promise that interesting things are out there to find. Some of my favorite memories came simply from stumbling about, such as finding a burned down village where some Dream Scourge victims had been locked up like lab rats, or journeying under a cliff and finding a combat trial offered up by a skeleton king, or finding a hidden paradise deep in the mountains of Galawain's tusks, or coming across a ranger tower in Emerald Stair that offered up an opportunity to restock on supplies and catch some rest. There are sometimes quests associated with these locations, but you're perfectly free to happen upon them by chance if you choose to explore beforehand, which is what I did in the first two zones. And choosing to go player-driven thankfully doesn't break the game. For example, there's a quest in the second area that asks you to kill the Delimgon Queen, the leader of a civilization of Groots. They're tree people. I had just so happened to find this area on my own and dispatched of the leader after our peace talks went south. Later, when I got to the quest itself, I was able to surprise the NPC by having exactly what he needed on hand, and that was encouraging. It was the game letting me play my way, and that's always a strength when it comes to player-driven exploration. It shows the developers put consideration into how different players may play different ways, and that's praiseworthy. So all in all, there's a joy of getting lost and discovering these maps on your own terms. You're of course free to hit the local tavern, grab quests, and go from there, but roaming around seems encouraged. It was pleasant in Skyrim, and it remains so here. But there's also tangible rewards that back up the joy of exploration. I won't go deep into it yet, but leveling up your gear is critical in keeping up with the difficulty curve, and the way you do that is by gathering resources out in the world. When you come across an optional dungeon, a smaller village, or an abandoned camp, there's often loot to be had after clearing out any dangerous foes that have made it home. Wandering the map and vacuuming up all this loot granted me access to weapons, but also the ability to upgrade those weapons, meaning that when I got around to doing the missions, I was on par with the competition. Not to mention, gear isn't the only rewards you'll find out in the world. You may stumble across new quests, like a man trapped in a hole in the ground, or a Pargrunin seeking help after his local library was overrun by Dream Scourge victims. There's also shrine pieces out in the world that, when assembled, give your character and party members buffs, which is nice. Whatever direction you decide to go, you'll be finding something of interest, and the constant rewards do a great job of offsetting the smallness of the zones compared to bigger open world games. Of course, exploration wouldn't be as enjoyable as it is if movement wasn't so refined. Look, the way your character moves in a game is so often taken for granted. If it's good, no one mentions it. If it's acceptable, no one mentions it. But if it's bad, the game gets clowned on, rightfully so. But I want to take the time to say, movement in Avowed is so fluid and fast. You zip around the open world quickly, as running doesn't tax your stamina meter. You can also jump pretty far, even over gaps that seem unconquerable. And while you can't brute force your way up a mountain like you could in Skyrim, you can still get over some pretty dangerous hurdles, like this lava pit if you're quick enough. The only movement-based mechanic that needed more work was the slide, as it feels like a complete momentum loss when you try to break it out. If they had nailed that, I'd be praising it even more, but the systems are still good as they are. There's certainly a level of parkour to the world design, and movement goes hand in hand with that to create an enjoyable experience. The result of all of this is great feeling exploration. Plenty of landmarks are combined with meaningful rewards and enjoyable movement to create a worthwhile experience. The only thing holding it back from greatness in my mind is the implementation of separate zones instead of one seamless open world. But if that allows them to get games out faster, then I can't complain too much, and I'm sure not everyone will feel the same way. When you're exploring the Living Lands, you'll be sure to run into plenty of quest-giving NPCs. None of them are going to feel like compelling characters that are offering you fleshed-out journeys, but they do provide the right amount of content, enough to fill a log without becoming bloat. Each of the 4 main areas will contain 2 to 3 meaty mainline quests that advance the story, but let's not focus on those now. Instead, let's talk about the optional content. Side quests, bounties, treasure hunts, companion quests, and camp talks. Every region contains a plentiful number of side quests, but I'd say they range only from below average to above average. Nothing great, none that will stay with you after completing them. This is somewhat disappointing as side content has evolved dramatically in the last few console generations, with games finding new ways to elevate it to new heights, like Elden Ring's Haligtree, the meaty companion quests in Ghost of Tsushima, the detailed stories of Witcher 3, and how even the game that inspires this one, Skyrim. Here though, side quests feel rather archaic, one-off missions that may or may not provide a moral choice at the end. The boring ones don't, and the ones that do feel like choices and adventures you've seen before. Ideas like to save or condemn a man who breaks the law trying to save his people, or finding a traitor in the ranks, or recovering some stolen family artifact, amongst other things. Don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with the classics, and after going so long without a game like this in a fantasy setting, it's good to be back, but this isn't going to feel like a crowning achievement for the industry. And you know what? I've said it before, and I'll say it again. That's fine. Not every new game is going to reinvent the wheel, and sometimes a cozy playthrough with something familiar in an unfamiliar setting is good enough, and that's how I felt here. Side quests were enjoyable in the moment, even if the memory of them is fleeting. Quick moral choices were like eating a bag of chips, one snack after another, with your last chew swiftly forgotten as another chip approaches your mouth. Next up, bounties and treasure hunts are exactly what you imagine. Bounties see you going after powerful foes in the world, whether it's a strong orc, a zombie, a ragtag group of bandits, or, most original, a den of spiders, led by their large queen. You're like a walking bottle of Raid in a world dominated by bugs, and bounties are your method of clearing the infestations. Treasure maps, meanwhile, show you sketches of the world, highlighting an entrance to where someone left behind their best loot. It can be fun to keep a lookout for these areas if you manage to stave off the temptation to look up their locations online. I managed to do just that, and uncovering them for myself was fruitful, although the rewards sometimes seemed a bit lacking, especially if it's a piece of loot that you aren't going to use if it doesn't fit your build. At least you can break them down for extra gear parts. While most of this side content is par for the course, the element that jumped out to me most were the companion quests, or rather, content relating to companions, and yes, there is a difference. You'll get 4 friends throughout the game: Kai, Marius, Giada, and Yatzli. And to be honest, I did not care for any of them. Kai was decent, Giada too I guess, but I didn't care about Yatzli or Marius at all. In fact, I nearly betrayed them all in the final moments of the game, just because they seemed so meh to me throughout. They were boring, and the thing that ends up being most interesting about them is how their companion quests are structured, because it's really bizarre. You see, Kai and Marius each get their own dedicated quests, while Giada and Yatzli don't get one at all, which feels like a slap in the face to those that enjoyed them over the boys. You come to learn more about the girls throughout the main story, which I guess is the reason they don't get a questline of their own, but it leaves them feeling left out, strung high and dry out in the cold. I don't really get that. However, if their quest would be thrown together so haphazardly as Kai and Marius's, then perhaps it's best that they didn't get one. Kai's companion quest is a 2-parter. He asks you to come along with him to visit an old friend named Tama while you're in Emerald Stair, but all you find is an abandoned home with a token that Kai gave to him back in the day. Kai sorta hints that their friendship didn't end well, and that's it. This quest line right here, this part of the quest, is over in like 3 minutes. Then, in Shatterscarp, you find Tama's badge, indicating the two were military buddies in the Rowatowa Navy, with Tama being the superior. You learn about how Tama gave his life to save Kai, and in the end, Kai was too cowardly to be there for his friend as he died. You help him to overcome this grief, and it sounds like a hearty and emotional tale to design a quest around, but it isn't. The quest line is over unbelievably fast, giving the player no time to invest themselves into the story. Like, sure, Kai is with you throughout the journey, so maybe you come to care about him then. I didn't, but maybe others will. But then the emotional development of his character is over so quickly that it really didn't resonate at all. These 2 quests were over in like 10 or 15 minutes total. It's like riding a boring roller coaster. Journeying with Kai is like your wait in line. It isn't memorable at all. And then the experience itself happens, the roller coaster, and that leaves you disappointed too. And it's over quickly. Journeying with Kai didn't mean much to me, but I assumed that his companion quest would unlock some new understanding or interest, but no, it's just over in the blink of an eye. Without building it up more, it just felt like another quest to chuck on the completed pile. I like when companions have full quest lines instead of one-off missions, giving the themes and growth a chance to develop naturally instead of feeling so forced. And I won't spoil Marius's here, but it feels largely the same, with an extra dose of tonal whiplash as he goes from being a stoic pessimist to a scared, whimpering weenie for just a little bit. I was not a fan of these quests at all. One thing I did not expect though was that the game would borrow so heavily from Baldur's Gate 3 in regards to camping. And this is what I meant earlier when I talked about the difference between companion quests and content relating to companions. You see, throughout the Living Lands, the player can find campgrounds where they can rest, forge new armor and weapon upgrades, and most importantly, chat with your companions to get their thoughts on both main story beats as well as the choices you make in side content. I was pretty stunned to see how fleshed out the dialogue branches are in these fireside chats, as you can learn a ton about your companions through a myriad of background questions. I would have preferred this information to be doled out naturally through the main quests, but keeping it by the campfire allows for players to engage with it as much or as little as they want. The most impressive thing to me was when my companions would react to the choices I made. One may praise me, while another might condemn my actions. When everything aligns just right, it's pretty cool, and it's the most real these characters feel throughout the journey. Like when Kai challenged my purpose in the Living Lands without me even approaching him. He took the initiative and started the conversation, granting him a ton of agency in the process. However, the emphasis with that praise must remain on when everything aligns, because sometimes it doesn't. You can only have 2 companions out with you in the field, which makes it extremely jarring when you go back to base and someone who wasn't even with you on the quest starts commenting and talking as if they were there. At the same time, the scoldings they give you don't often result in any tangible consequences, as there is no reputation system. Even if you piss someone off at every turn, they will still fight alongside of you and obey your commands. I can't help but to feel like this was a missed opportunity to grant them more agency by backing up their worldviews and reactions with gameplay penalties that the player would have to deal with. This is indicative of a larger problem, that dialogue choices in this game are nothing more than flavor text a majority of the time. They allow you to flesh out your character's personality and motivations, but very rarely does the world react to those choices in turn. Now, yes, there are some major choices, usually found at the end of each zone, and they do have purpose and they carry weight. Don't get me wrong on that. But don't let the comparison to Baldur's Gate 3 fool you. There isn't nearly the same level of consequences for the things you say in Avowed. Be super kind and helpful, and the people will thank you. Be a jerk, and the people may scoff a bit before saying thank you and giving you the same rewards. There are a few dialogue options that are locked behind stat checks, but there is not a stat directly tied to dialogue, meaning that no matter how you act, you'll often get the same outcome. At best, you may get another dialogue option because you chose Arcane Scholar as your background, or because your might is high enough that you intimidate someone, or that your perception is so keen that you pick up on an extra detail to a story. It's all supplemental dialogue that doesn't lock off any core options or change your social dynamics or standings with anyone, and I think that's a shame. It doesn't matter what you say. It minimizes your ability to roleplay when the world itself doesn't react meaningfully to your behavior and words. I really fear that Baldur's Gate 3's advancements in dialogue will result in a lot of other RPGs feeling lesser in this regard, and Avowed is the first victim in my eyes. There's an opportunity to assign your character a personality, just don't expect anyone to care all that much. A large reason for why this video is titled the way that it is would be that Avowed's best elements are mostly taken from Skyrim and tweaked to fit this title's ambition. Exploration, like in the Bethesda classic, is excellent, as I've already established, but the comparisons don't end there. Combat is similar to Skyrim as well, and it's actually the one point of comparison where I think Avowed comes out on top of the competition. Fights in Avowed will look and feel familiar to anyone who's played Skyrim. Your character has 2 hands, and it's up to you what goes in each. The options are plentiful. You can go sword and board, deflecting incoming attacks before dishing out some damage of your own. You can equip 2 daggers and start slashing away, parrying be damned. Same goes for handling 2 spears if you want. Or how about a true strength-based character who lugs around the biggest 2-handed weapon they can find, smashing up anything in their path? Or do you fancy magic? A wand and grimoire make for an excellent ranged mage character. And perhaps most interesting would be the game's inclusion of guns, both pistols and rifles. Not something you often see in a fantasy setting, but here they are, and they rock. Especially those pistols. The visual and audio feedback on them was so satisfying. I used one for most of my run and I never got tired of it. And if you want to get wild and wacky, nothing is really stopping you from doing so. Equip a shield and punch with your other hand. Or a dagger and a grimoire might be intriguing. Or play like I did for most of the adventure with a gun in one hand and a wand in the other. Nothing like a little gunpowder and magic to vaporize my opponents. The options are nearly endless, but there are a few small caveats. You can't equip every single weapon to either hand. For example, you can't have 2 shields. Not sure why you'd want to, but you can't. Total freedom would have meant being able to do the dumbest shit possible, but the developers don't quite let you do that. But besides that, you have a lot of choices. And luckily, you have 2 weapon loadout slots that can be switched between freely during combat, which is awesome. I played mostly as a ranged character, as aforementioned, so in my second loadout I equipped a rifle so that I could do some extra damage from long range. Of course, I eventually got to the point that my pistol was more powerful, so I ended up sticking with that in the last zone. I never got tired of firing a crack shot from my electric pistol before chipping away using magic blasts from my wand. It was great. As a result, I'll say that the freedom to approach combat how you want is by far the greatest strength of the combat system. You can even reset your stats and skills in exchange for the game's currency, meaning you can flip from a ranged character to a melee build, or vice versa whenever you'd like. That level of on-the-fly freedom encourages you to experiment in combat if you want, while also allowing you to stick with a combination that you enjoy once you find it. If I ever replay this game again, it wouldn't be for the story, it would be to play as a sword and board character to see how it changes fights. Or how, maybe even a more stealthy character who sneaks around a lot more. Stealth is not great here, but it is possible if you're careful. But once you're in combat itself, your loadout will be put to the test. You have a stamina bar that dictates how much you can do before having to wait a bit for it to recharge. Every button prompt action, whether it's a dodge, a sword swing, a gun blast, or a magic bolt, is going to take stamina, except for blocking of course. Since I wasn't focused on defensive tactics at all, and I played like a glass cannon, managing my stamina was critical, making sure not to overheat, thus leaving myself open for attack. I was not perfect, at all, but I did well enough. It became a dance, backing up from enemies to avoid their blows, while also not ranging too far away that my attacks wouldn't land. Juggling companion abilities was also vital in keeping me alive, whether it was Giada's healing, Kai's pulverizing leap, Marius' traps, or Yahtzee magic blast, the latter of which was my favorite. Casting a few spells was also a forte of mine, which costs essence, but can turn the tide of a fight quickly with mighty magic. And of course, finding a good moment to chug a healing potion kept me on my toes. Controlling the chaos is perhaps the best way I can describe this combat system, especially in large-scale fights with multiple enemies. They aren't afraid to come after you in droves, and managing all your resources and attacks efficiently ends up quite captivating, which helped ensure that combat never got stale. If this was an 80-hour game, it might have, but at 40 hours, it felt just right. All of these factors kept me active in fights, making sure that none of them ended up feeling mindless, which was great, because the enemy variety certainly does not help. I really hope you like fighting Zaribs, because you're going to be seeing them over and over again amongst the other foes. There's a decent amount of enemies, like those lizard people, as well as bugs, ghosts, spiders, humans, skeletons, and even tree people, but none of them feel like interesting new roster additions to the fantasy formula, except maybe that last one. They're all pretty cut and dry, and most of them can be found in all 4 zones, which gets repetitive. If the rhythm of combat wasn't so engrossing, then the lack of more enemy types would have dragged it down severely. Just like in Skyrim, enemies don't change much as you level up or access higher difficulty areas. No, they just get new titles, more health, and maybe a color palette swap. They will retain the same attack styles and patterns as before, just with more red backing up their health bar. They're still going to charge at you with sticks, attack with magic or bows, or heal their allies. Speaking of that, it seems like a majority of encounters in the last 2 zones contain an enemy healer, and while it was annoying to deal with, I love their inclusion. You'll be going face to face with a tough foe, whittling down their health, only to see it get fully restocked in an instant. Your eyes dart around, searching for the color green, signaling a healing circle, and as you dash over to deal with that cleric bastard, you have to dodge incoming attacks from regular soldiers, while the healer usually attempts to escape. You have to chase them down, and it makes for an interesting game of cat and mouse, adding another layer to combat encounters. With all of that being said, your delight from combat will be severely hampered if you aren't keeping up with gear progression. That's right, your weapons and armor need to be leveled up just as much as you do. I think this is one of Avowed's most contentious points because you're gonna need a lot of crafting materials to upgrade your weapons, especially if you're consistently using your second loadout. There's 5 different rarities and 3 tiers within each rarity, meaning that you'll be needing a buttload of crafting materials just to move up one rank, especially when you're constantly using more than one weapon. Not to mention, your armor needs materials too. It can lead to some tough choices on what to level up if you aren't actively seeking out the materials. Now, you can offset the hunt by buying new weapons from shops, but they prove quite costly, meaning you may miss out on other important items like potions and lockpicks. To be fair, crafting materials can be found all over the map, but they are most densely packed in areas relating to side content. This means that you will be railroaded into optional objectives if you want to keep up with the level curve, and I think that won't jive with some. Personally, a game of this style already begs you to engage with the side content, so it wasn't a problem for me. That's the main gameplay loop I signed up for: exploring, finding quests, completing them, and harvesting materials to take on tougher challenges waiting for me in the next zone. However, on subsequent runs, I could see this being a pain. As I've already gone over, the side content is fine, but it's not elite. I'm not itching to do these quests or bounties over again, but I wouldn't mind seeing how combat changes with a different playstyle. However, I'm not going to be able to keep up with the level curve of enemies unless I'm completing that side content and collecting those resources. I guess technically I don't have to do the quests, but if I'm going to be adjacent to them and completing areas that pertain to them, I might as well for the extra experience that they afford. Gear progression ends up being a double-edged sword, rewarding you for doing what you already love doing in these games: exploring every inch of the map and completing quests. Doing the fun stuff rewards you with the items you need to get stronger. It's game design 101. However, because so many resources are required to keep up with the rising curve, it can begin to feel tedious as you meticulously search every room for every hidden chest while combing through the inventory of every merchant that you come across. Some will like it, while others will find it dull and uninteresting after a while. Because enemies stay the same mechanically, with only bigger numbers backing them up, it can certainly feel like the difficulty is arbitrary, and that sentiment can bleed over into your perception of the gear leveling system rather easily. Of course, I do believe that the strength and genuine fun of combat does make up for it, as winning frantic fights only causes you to seek more action. Luckily, there's even more systems piled on top of the basics to let you flesh out your character even further, including attributes and skill trees. Just like in the Outer Worlds, there's a few different stats for you to invest points in, and they affect things like health, damage, carrying capacity, stamina, attack speed, mana, and even second wind, your ability to revive yourself after death. Hell, they even borrowed from Sekiro. What surprised me most about these attributes is something I've already mentioned. None of them relate directly to dialogue, instead defining your potential in combat. That decision alone severely neuters the dialogue system, but at least it helps you to build a proper character for fighting. Points are at a premium too, which made me really stop and consider what I wanted each skill point to go into. Their allocation carried real weight, but if I ever felt I screwed up, I took solace knowing that they could be reallocated for a price, and that's always appreciated. The same goes for skill trees. You won't get a ton of points, one for each level, which gets you to lock in on a particular build. For me, this meant investing heavily in wizard abilities, one of the 3 main skill trees alongside of fighter and ranger. My choices went beyond sword and board, guns, and magic though, because even within the wizard pathway, I had to choose which elemental affinities that I wanted to focus on. I opted mostly for fire, considering both of my weapons were already inflicting shock. I figured a little burn damage would be nice too, but I could have easily chose to focus on spectral magic, or lightning bolts, or even freezing my foes in an icy storm. If I ever wanted to play as a mage again, I'd have new options to try out, which incentivizes multiple playthroughs and a feeling that you're getting your money's worth. Your choice in weapons will go a long way in determining which skills you want to go after, but again, you can change your entire playstyle in the blink of an eye with respeccing. So the result of all of these factors is an engaging and fun combat system that just feels good to play. The strong movement mechanics, the flexibility and feeling of getting stronger through leveling, and the freedom to play however you want makes combat a treat to engage with. I never got tired of it as fights got harder, whether it was new boss encounters or hordes of foes. It just remained fun to juggle all the options at my fingertips. It pairs up wonderfully with exploration to create a really fun core gameplay loop that allows this game to overcome its other issues. I want to preface this section by asking you a question. What do you remember most about your time with Skyrim? Was it the main story beats, or the other adventures you got into on your own as you shirked your Dragonborn priorities? I'd wager more folks are gonna side with the player-driven elements more so than the narrative because, let's be honest, it wasn't some elaborate or heartfelt story. It wasn't close to being the magnum opus of video game storytelling, but it didn't need to be. That wasn't the overall objective of that game's design. No, the narrative was there to give you another plot thread to follow along with as you uncovered the land for yourself. Avowed shares a lot of DNA with Skyrim, as is self-evident by its design philosophy and fantasy setting, but it does place a higher priority on storytelling than its predecessor. That's because Avowed has a lot less to do than Skyrim, so players are naturally going to be driven towards completing the story once a zone's content well dries up and they part for greener pastures. As a result, Avowed's storytelling and characters deserve more examination since it's thrust in your face far more than Bethesda's crown jewel. And to be honest, I don't think it's that good. At all. If we had as much freedom and content as Skyrim, this wouldn't be as big of a problem. It would be just another avenue to explore in a vast stretch of content, but that's not the case. So let's dive in, and yes, there will be full story spoilers here. I've already established that the game's opening lacks a solid narrative hook, something to get you on board with the adventure and fuel your journey. You're an envoy sent from a land you have never seen before, and therefore have no real attachment to. And you're here to stop a mysterious plague that may or may not be related to a voice in your head. Meanwhile, lots of different terms containing way too many vowels are thrown at you in quick succession, and without proper context to get a real sense of what's going on beyond the basic mission. Only one task is clear. We gotta stop the Dream Scourge. From there, you'll journey through the 4 main zones, completing the story missions with about 2 to 3 meaty ones in each area. I'm assuming you've played the game if you've made it this far into the video, so I'll just briefly recap what happens. Along your journey, you meet up with 4 companions who travel alongside of you: Kai the Soldier, Marius the Survivalist, Giada the Animancer, and Yahtzee the Witch. In your travels, you come to understand that the Dream Scourge is a disease that infects humanoids and slowly drives them to madness, almost like a zombie. You know that to save the living lands and to get them indebted to your nation, you'll have to find the source of it and cut it off. At the same time, a paramilitary group called the Steel Garrote work alongside of you in a very weak alliance. The Steel Garrote act as vicious colonizers who see the living lands as something to be tamed, and they're led by a woman named Ludwine. At one point, they go so far as to burn the city of Fior-Messiverno to the ground, punishing the Animancers who live there as they believe their necromancy magics may be contributing to the Dream Scourge. This was the one genuine emotional jolt I got from the entire story, by the way, this moment right here. Shortly before this, though, you learn that the voice you've been hearing in your head throughout the journey is a god named Sapadal, who basically represents Mother Nature. In fact, you are their godlike. You see visions of the past and how Soppadal interacted with previous colonies, with your choices influencing the god's personality. Regardless of the past, Soppadal is currently trapped and is guiding you towards them so that you can free them. You also learn that Soppadal is the source of the Dream Scourge. It's a result of them lashing out over their imprisonment, sort of like an edgy teenager full of angst. In the end, the choice on who to stay loyal to is up to you, with 4 major options: Adir, Soppadal, your companions, or the Steel Garrote. For me, I ended up trying to appease everyone, people pleaser that I am. So I freed Soppadal, and tried to get the Living Lands and Adir to work together in a mutually beneficial way, while eliminating Lodween and the Steel Garrote, given how evil they were. That's a quick synopsis of the game's story, but now I want to dive into why it didn't land for me, and there's 4 major reasons. The first is the weak opening hook that I've already gone over, but the other 3 include the guided nature of the story, how major choices are framed, and the mediocrity of the character writing. Avowed is an RPG where your choices influence how the story plays out. In fact, it includes slides at the end of the game to inform you on what came next for the Living Lands and its people because of your actions. And as a quick side note, you can't return to the game world after entering the final mission, which is a drag, so keep that in mind if you play this. Anyway, the point is that you're afforded plenty of opportunity to choose, to free or kill Soppadal, to punish the Steel Garrote or side with them, to decide the fate of entire towns, and to negotiate the relationship between Adir and the Living Lands, amongst many other choices. My issue is that many of these options feel like they are nudging you into a certain playstyle by leveraging morality against you. Because of the weak opening, it's hard to feel a sense of loyalty to Adir, and because the Steel Garrote are assholes, going around killing innocent people and burning villages, it's hard to view them as true allies. Meanwhile, Soppadal is incredibly hard to get an understanding of because how cryptically he speaks, and a lack of time with him. So it's only kind of natural that the player's going to feel the most connection to the companions, given you spend the most amount of time with them and the other parties are weak. Again, you aren't forced to side with the companions, you can do what you want, but the game certainly guides you towards that playstyle. It actively promotes you to become a hero to these people. And here's the kicker, I didn't want to do that. The companions never managed to fully endear themselves to me, so I couldn't give 2 craps about them. But when I tried to stay loyal to Adir, all I got was scolding. I borderline considered supporting the Steel Garrote just to push back against the game's insistence that I be a good little hero and look out for these people. I opted not to after their moral ambiguity was replaced with pure evil right in your face after they burned down Fiormas Iverno, but damn, I wish the game didn't feel like I was being dragged along at the wrist. Next, I'd say the game struggles with how it presents some of its major choices. Dialogue options in RPGs mean the most to me when they are informed, when I've been given ample time to understand the circumstances, to feel the weight of the choice, and to understand the consequences that it will have. For example, I'd say the best choice in Avowed comes at the end of the 3rd zone, when you're presented 2 options for how to stop the Dream Scourge spreading in Shatterscarp. You've found the source of it, and it needs to be cut off, but how to do that? Lodween suggests destroying the temple it's housed in, which means destroying sacred lands, and not necessarily guaranteeing that the Dream Scourge will stop. Meanwhile, a powerful wizard named Ringram suggests cutting the source off from the rest of the world, but to do so, an incredible amount of soul energy will be required. This means that an unknown quantity of random people around Shatterscarp will be killed instantly, their souls going into the spell. The Dream Scourge will stop completely here, but many innocents will die. And this choice comes after a full dive into the ruins, so you get a chance to contextualize the situation before being offered the choice. At the same time, you understand the consequences of both options. Destroying the ruins doesn't guarantee a solution and means siding with the clear enemy, while the concrete result will yield many deaths. Neither option is ideal, and you fully understand that before choosing. And the choice carries weight as many NPCs, both companions and townfolks, will comment on your selection. It's great. And the same can be said about the events relating to the Pargrunin in Solace Keep that I went over earlier. So yeah, not every choice is left ambiguous, and I really liked those. However, the game is also keen on providing moments of choice without giving you all the information, and it mostly relates to Soppadal. This god seems to be written very vaguely so that the player can help to define their personality, but the result for me was that I never got a full understanding. And it doesn't help that Soppadal is not likable, speaking in abstracted allegories about nature, and honestly being an annoying brat most of the time, crying out like a child, and interrupting my rest at camp when I just wanted to get back out in the field. I really didn't like Soppadal, and I would have probably ended up slaying him if it didn't feel like the game was desperately pushing me to free him to support the Living Lands going forward. My feelings on the character aside, it's still hard to get a grasp on Soppadal. The ancient memories he shares with you are presented without much context, which made them jarring, and honestly quite boring. At the same time, I never had a full grasp on what the relationship between a god and a godlike entails, even after spending a meaty side quest with another godlike. Sargamas seemed like a pretty suspicious and evil dude, and he spoke about how his god destroyed a civilization, and now he wants to revive him. Yeah, that didn't sound ideal to me. So, without a clear understanding of this connection, I often felt compelled to push Soppadal away, while the game insisted on bringing him closer to me. I felt every choice I made in regards to him was done blindly and without necessary context. I was shaping my story with him with closed eyes, and I didn't enjoy that at all. So, in other words, informed choice means more to me than blind choice, but Avowed dips its toes into both of these pools, more so than I would have preferred. Some may like blind choices more, as it's more reminiscent of our real world, where we can't know the future and don't always have all the information. But for me, it just left me soured on a character that I think I was supposed to enjoy. Of course, I felt that way about most of the recurring characters, none of which ever managed to make me care. I'm not going to say that Obsidian put no effort into the characterization of the companions because they each certainly have their own backgrounds, personalities, and established beliefs. The problem is that they never make you care. No emotionally resonant moments or shared experiences that got me to feel their presence beyond their mechanical utility in fights. I think a large reason for that is because, again, you can only bring two out with you into the field at once, and you can't always guarantee who's going to be with you, so it's hard to plan moments around that. It's not like the game doesn't try to make you like them, particularly with the two companion quests, but as I've already mentioned, they were duds. Even Giada and Yatsley's big moments didn't affect me at all. Giada's trauma is offloaded on you immediately after meeting her when you find out that her parents' unquenchable thirst for animancy got them turned into trees. Without time to get to know Giada more first, this trauma dumping comes off as hollow as her parents' tree trunk bodies. And Yatsley's big choice didn't intrigue me either. She must decide to either stay at home with her love or to pursue her passion for magic by studying under an archmage. I didn't really care what option she chose because it's her life and she meant nothing to me. Sad, but true. I can't pinpoint exactly why I didn't care about the characters, but I suspect it has something to do with simple personalities and failed attempts at drawing emotion out of me. The same lack of care applied to other characters as well. Soppadal's ambiguity led me to feel fed up with them. Ludwig, meanwhile, was not intimidating at all, and that's supposed to be the main point of her character, so she comes off as laughable. And the other NPCs you meet along the way, such as town leaders and side quest characters, never really got me invested either. If all the time with the companions couldn't make me care, then a few one-off encounters with these folks wasn't going to cut it. I don't think the writing was as strong as we've seen from Obsidian in the past in nearly every regard. Character dramatization, plot structure, and world building. None of it hit home for me, as I always was more compelled to explore and keep fighting, turning this game into an enjoyable opportunity to extract content without emotion. That sounds harsh, but as I've said, exploration and combat are really enjoyable, so there is still fun to be had. And the storytelling isn't awful, it just doesn't reach far enough for my liking. Some decent choices, but not enough. A few extra bold steps would have been appreciated. Here's an example, going back to what I was just talking about. If you chose to side with Ringram and sacrifice innocent souls to cut off the Dream Scourge, it would have been haunting but amazing if one of your companions was randomly selected and killed as a result of your choice. Now that would have been an impactful consequence for your actions. You lose someone in the narrative, but you also feel their loss in the gameplay, because their abilities are just locked off to you. Such a better idea than having NPCs telling you that a bunch of people died and they're totally pissed at you, but go ahead and stay in town as long as you'd like. Really, it's no rush to leave. Anyway, yeah, the plot is serviceable, the characters are fine, but it's not quite what you'd hope for an RPG. Weakish characters, some uninformed choices, a lot of moments presented without context or build-up, and a beyond gentle nudge towards being a good guy. When it comes to presentation and performance, Avowed isn't looking to reset the industry. As with all of my Xbox reviews, I played on a Series S, which is obviously the least powerful, but I still felt it provided a nice looking visual aesthetic. This mostly applies to the landscapes, as it certainly feels like the team did a great job of crafting this world, at least its looks. Again, its biomes are ones you've explored hundreds of times, but there are some nice looking vistas to peer out from. I'd say the game looks best in some of the interior environments that do a great job with the lighting. I always love it when I'm in a cave and I see light pouring in through one section, telling me that there's a way out if only I were tall enough. And the way light transitions as your character's eyes adjust when moving from indoors to outdoors is awesome. I'm a big fan of that detail. I'm also a sucker for a game that features a rich color palette, and Avowed certainly does that too. Combined with excellent lighting, you get a few treat moments that are a feast for the eyes. The art direction doesn't go for hyper-realistic, and I think that was a smart choice. This game wasn't trying to redefine modern gaming on any front, but instead to provide a fun experience, and so the art style they settled on is perfect for that. Characters and NPCs look fine. It's easy to tell the differences between them, and the different races fit into the fantasy aesthetic well. I'd say the music was alright, nothing super memorable. I doubt anyone will leave this game feeling the same way they did after hearing Skyrim's soundtrack, but it's fine for what it is. Voice acting was also decent, nothing captivating, but not bad. Sometimes the actors tried a little too hard, especially Marius, and it comes off flimsy, especially during his companion quest. I didn't buy his panic attack at all, which soured the whole mood of that quest from the very beginning. But Ludwine's performance was arguably worse. She's supposed to be this super threatening antagonist, but every time I hear her talk, she sounds like a grandmother that smokes cigarettes her whole life. Makes her feel like all bark with no bite, and I never truly respected her as a villain because of this. And in terms of performance, I was pleased with the experience. Maybe the occasional frame rate drops during intensive combat moments, but nothing awful. Considering I was playing on the weakest possible console featuring Avowed, I was pleased with how it ran and didn't encounter any huge bugs or glitches, which is nice. With so many moving parts and systems, it very well could have been a mess, but no, things ran really well. So overall, I'd say the presentation and performance were serviceable and good. Nothing mind-bending or immaculate, but pretty good for the ambitions this game strives to achieve. I hope that I've been fair in my analysis of Avowed, highlighting both the strengths and the weaknesses as I see them. For me personally, I was really excited going into Avowed because of one reason. I wanted to play something like Skyrim, okay? Obsidian has made a game like this before with the Outer Worlds, but that's a title whose details have faded in my memory. But I do remember one thing, that I had fun with it. And I imagine that's how my time with Avowed will be remembered. In the years to come, my memory of the characters' names and of the journey itself will go to the wayside, much like it has with the Outer Worlds, and even Skyrim to a degree. But you know what? That's okay with me. I came for the exploration and combat, and I wasn't let down, although it's still hard not to wish for more. I wanted to enjoy the dialogue options and storytelling just as much, but I can't say that I did. The true strength of Avowed remains in being dropped off in a world and being told to get out there and go adventure, whatever shape that takes for you, while also being granted the power to build a character how I wanted, with plenty of opportunities to shape my playstyle. And while quest givers and companions rarely felt like genuine characters to me, their role as content brokers was enough. An excuse to explore, fight, loot, and upgrade, a tried and true gameplay loop that remains as satisfying as ever. And you know what? There were some decent choices, and that was nice. So, like I said at the beginning of this video, yes, I do recommend Avowed. While it will remain in the shadows of the games that it continuously draws inspiration from, it's still strong enough to stand on its own 2 feet, and give you a nostalgic blast from the past. Just keep in mind that if you're looking for a reactive world full of choice and consequence, you're better off playing something else. This probably won't scratch that itch. And you know what? That wraps up my review of Avowed. There's no real big clever line to end this video. Nope, not this time, but still, thanks for watching. And with that, we come to the end of another video. Avowed is fun, definitely worth playing on Game Pass over the course of a few weeks. If you enjoyed this video and you want to support me further, consider becoming a channel member, leaving a super thanks, or donating on my Buy Me a Coffee page. The links to those can be found below. I wanted to give a special shout out to Slatinum Bookies, as they were the first person ever to support me directly by leaving a super thanks. So thank you so much for that, my friend. As for upcoming videos, I'll take this opportunity to announce that I have broken ground on an updated look at Sly 3 Honor Among Thieves, and I do plan on covering a handful of the following games: Atomfall, South of Midnight, Clair Obscur Expedition 33, Elden Ring Night Rain, and Death Stranding 2, so look forward to those. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Please leave a like if you enjoyed the video, consider subscribing for more, follow me on Twitter at NopNapNarp, and as always, have a nice day, and take care.